seems like they are manipulating it. That part was clear. And I guess there are some days where it's hard. How long does that go on for? You have the supply and demand fundamentals, which would suggest something, but I guess I'm wondering how you handle that because it's something I think a lot about. And, I don't want to be giving out information that's not helpful to people. I don't know what else to make of this situation. It's not an ideal situation in general, and curious any thoughts you have on that. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and excited to bring you today's show with Andy Schectman, where we really examine if we could be wrong about the silver thesis. Obviously, I talk quite a bit about why I left Wall Street and why I became so interested in silver and covering the silver market. I've always done my best to provide objective coverage and not just say something that's unsubstantiated. And I actually spend a lot of time always trying to see if there's something I'm missing or there's somewhere I could be wrong. I know Andy Schectman does that as well. So in today's call, we'll really examine that and the thought process that goes in there, which I like to think that you will find helpful, to point out that it's not just a matter of saying something just to get anybody else to do anything, but really the thought process that goes into that. So today we'll examine, could we be wrong about silver? Is there something that is going to hold the silver price down infinitely? And I think you'll find this conversation pretty genuine and helpful. So looking forward to bring that to you. Real quick before we get started, I did have a note from BlackRock Silver, who is bringing us today's show. And they did recently announce a technical report on their Tonopah West gold silver project, which was largely in line with the maiden resource estimate that they released a couple of weeks ago. No material differences in the technical report from what was disclosed on May 2nd. Although Andrew Pollard of BlackRock will be joining me over the weekend. We're going to talk with him with the details of what came out in the technical report. So, we have a lot of BlackRock shareholders in our audience, and certainly some good things going on with their project, even at the current silver price, let alone if we do have a rebound and the price goes higher. So just wanted to pass that along, that their technical report is out. Link to that is in the description field below. And with that said, now let's dig into the silver market with Andy Schectman. Obviously, the big news this week was that the Fed did raise 75 basis points. I think it was the biggest hike since 1994, which set off its own set of issues back then. Seems like it's setting off its own set of issues this time as well. And curious, the customers that you talk to, are they buying metal? Are they selling metal? How are they looking at this? What is the tone out there, and what are you hearing?
I think inflation is on the front page of everyone's mind. It really is. And you look at 2020, inflation was at 1.4%. We're already 4 times that rate where we are right now. But is the Fed really getting serious about it? It's interesting how the information leaks out to the public. In fact, I was talking to you a couple of nights ago, and you had heard about this, that it was going to be 75 basis points. And then right after that, you see JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs spokesmen are saying the same thing, when it was all along projected to be 50 basis points. But what is 75 basis points in the light of almost 9% inflation? Of course, excluding food, energy, and housing, the real metric of inflation is double digits for sure. Ask John Williams, he'll tell us that. I think people understand that the Fed is trapped, that they're caught, and they're caught in a quandary of death by hyperinflation or death by depression. And when you have asset prices where they are right now, and starting to shake as interest rates barely rise. Look at the 30-year mortgage as an example. It's over 6% right now. It's doubled in a year, and yet the federal funds rate had only gotten to 0.75%. Now that federal funds rate will be 1.5%, what does that mean? Paul Volcker in 1980 raised the federal funds rate to 19.75%. That's getting serious about inflation. What they're doing is pussyfooting and jawboning. And I guess we'll see how much the markets can really take. But I think people are realizing that, Chris, and people are buying gold and silver right now, not to get wealthy, but because it is and represents wealth. And in a world of asset prices that are so crazy overvalued, there's nothing on the planet that offers the argument that silver does. Of course, The price action doesn't support it. And we can talk about that if you'd like, and the manipulation surrounding it. But from a standpoint of utility in industry, where solar panels are supposed to double or triple in the next year or two, and the same thing with battery powered vehicles, and in a digital and green application or world where digital and green applications are expanding, there isn't an asset on the planet that offers what silver does. In the light of everything being blown up, silver is still under half of what it was. So that's why people are buying, because they're afraid. They see inflation, they see the frailty of their investments, and they realize silver is, even though it hasn't expressed itself yet, represents maybe the best value in the investment universe. I don't see anything that offers the value that silver does.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. And I guess to take the other side of that, a lot of us have felt that's been the case for a while, some since 1980. And then certainly in the last couple of years, I think hopefully we've put a little more detail on it, the comments from Ross last year and otherwise. But it sometimes makes you wonder at the end of the day. I mean, I think we've learned in the last couple of years that it's not conspiracy theory that the world is controlled by a lot of these banks, and that, how deep you want to tie it to Klaus Schwab in this World Economic Forum. But, just living through the COVID thing, and it's like that realm of things that should happen, yet seems like they are manipulating it. That part was clear. And I guess there are some days where it's hard. How long does that go on for? You have the supply and demand fundamentals, which would suggest something, but I guess I'm wondering how you handle that, because it's something I think a lot about. And, I don't want to be giving out information that's not helpful to people. I don't know what else to make of this situation. It's not an ideal situation in general, and curious any thoughts you have on that.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure people listening do too. You're a human being, Chris. You have more courage than almost anyone in this space. In fact, you do have more courage. The only people that even rival it would be Silver Bill Murphy and Chris Powell, who have stood up to the cartel forever. But you stand up just as broadly and strongly as they do. And I think when you have invested as much emotionally and physically and mentally as you have into this industry, it's natural. I've been doing this for 30 years. It weighs on me too. Yet I keep coming back to my asset portfolio, which is almost entirely gold and silver, because I don't see a safer place to put it. And in the end, I think you'll be proven right. Along the way, it's tough. You have to have strong fingertips. You have to hang on. You have to trust your conviction. And ask yourself, why is it the most concentrated short position in any commodity traded on COMEX? Why do they exert so much effort to hold it down when the fundamentals are so extraordinary? And I think one of the things that make it difficult for silver to express itself is the dollar hegemony, where the dollar rules the roost and the government behind it pulls the strings. But what happens if all of a sudden the dollar loses its singular world reserve status? What happens if Saudi Arabia, who is already in negotiations with China to sell oil for yuan, just like Nigeria is already doing? What happens if we see an accentuation of what's going on with Russia? They're only accepting ruble or gold for their commodities. They just struck a deal with India to sell arms for rupee and ruble. How about the Belt Road Initiative with China connecting 85% or 80% of human population? And now there's this new route between Iran and India. What we are seeing is a de-dollarization, a move away from the dollar hegemony. And when that snaps, when that happens, things like the ability to manipulate the COMEX price, I think, will be a thing of the past. And the only reason all of these nations aren't bitching about it right now is because that is what they've been transitioning into. They have been the ones accumulating gold and silver. They have been the ones quietly de-dollarizing. So they play along the game. If you can't beat them, join them type of thing, until they are able to beat them. And they'll beat them by, I believe, challenging the dollar for singular world reserve status. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I know that's not what you want. But look at it this way: the Chinese digital yuan has done close to $10 billion in transactions over the last year. With all of these countries coalescing together, Russia, China, India, South Africa, the likelihood, I believe, and these are all the biggest producers of gold and silver in the world, the biggest accumulators of it as well. What I believe will happen at some point is that they will challenge the dollar. They will issue a gold-backed or commodity-backed BRICS nations currency on the back of the success that the Chinese have already had with their Belt Road Initiative and their digital yuan. When something like that happens, when the dollar loses its hegemony, when the dollar loses its ability through sanctions and edict and governmental decree to control the markets, that's when it snaps overnight. Now, it's not fun waiting for it, and I understand and I respect your candor in telling the world that this weighs on you. Weighs on me too, and I think that makes you a human and makes you honest. But in the end, we'll be proven right. And I think there are very few things on the planet that offer the utility, the necessity, and the scarcity that silver does. In a world of blown up asset prices, it's the most undervalued asset on the planet. So being right sometimes means you're wrong until you're right. And I've experienced that a lot. Yeah, we may not have been right yet, but we will be. And mathematics and economics tell us we should have been right a long time ago. But this is a high stakes game, one that has high stakes players, and they've been very adept at creating this perception of reality that I think is getting harder and harder to do.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And perhaps some days when I wonder, will this thing ever move? I mean, on the other hand, we still do have gold near $2,000 despite the interest rate hikes over 1,800, not far off from the all-time high. And I think something that maybe it's a little bit easier for me because I'm able to sometimes step away from the day-to-day price. And when you look at where things are going, I mean, you see Joe Biden, and I'm not trying to take political sides, but I mean, it doesn't paint a picture of someone who's in control and knows what they're doing here. And you see these things with Russia, and there's a lot to suggest that some sort of new system could be coming. Yet it's tough, and I think for a lot of people listening, it's challenging because, like that scene in The Big Short, where it's like we're betting on something to happen that's never happened before, at least in our lifetimes. I mean, this has happened before historically, but that's something that I think is a challenge for me.
Let me address that.
What would you say there?
Let me address that. Thank you. In 1974, Henry Kissinger struck a deal with the Saudis to value oil in dollars globally through OPEC. And for that, we would protect the Saudi kingdom. The fact that Russia signed a joint military cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia the day after we left Afghanistan with our tail between our legs, and the next day did it with Nigeria, signals the beginning of the end of things that we've seen in our lifetime. In our lifetime, we've known nothing but dollar hegemony, dollar strength, and the world reserve currency. I would argue those days are coming to an end. And so that's when things change. And, when people are looking at alternatives to something that you're recommending, recommending is the wrong word, talking about the virtues of it. Look at every other asset class out there. Stocks, bonds, real estate are all at all-time highs, courtesy of the Fed's low interest rates and easy money policy. If indeed, and forget about what I'm saying about the dollar losing its singular petrodollar status, but what happens if the Fed is true to its word? What happens if the Fed really does start to raise rates continuously, to really start selling 90 billion worth of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, which you told me just the other day had no bid at one point? But what happens if that happens and the balance sheet starts to dwindle and the interest rates start to rise and the house prices start to exponentially decrease and the stocks and bonds start to decrease in the face of rising interest rates? All of the assets that we just talked about are inversely correlated to it. Now, you mentioned gold is near its high despite the interest rate hike. That's true. Interest rates and gold are inversely correlated. However, it's real interest rates and the price of gold. And that's Gibson's paradox, which speaks to the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. And when you talk about real interest rates and the Fed getting tough on inflation, 1.5% on the federal funds rate with 9% inflation is not getting tough. It's spitting in the ocean. So, you know, and I'm just going to focus on gold for one moment. Gold is doing what it's supposed to be doing with all of the other assets in securities and in cryptos getting crushed. Gold is holding its own, and it's up a little bit, 1 or 2%. Everything else is down 15 to 30%. But remember, there's a 90% correlation between gold and silver throughout all of history. So if gold leads the way, typically silver will catch up and surpass it in performance. The arguments that you're giving are completely sound and completely logical. It's a depleted asset. It's massively needed in industry. It's hugely accumulated monetarily. And it's just disappearing. So I think that in the end, you'll be proven right, Chris. And we all need voices like yours to hang in there and to keep telling us that we're all on the right page. And the research you do, the way you stand up to the CFTC and what you've already brought to the table with your Bart Chilton interview and many other things that you have that no one else has uncovered in all these years, I can understand why it weighs on you. I can, and it does on me too. But yet, if you looked at my portfolio, and I know if we looked at your portfolio, what's inside of it, it's almost entirely what you talk about. And so your conviction is something that's admirable, as is your wanting to let people know that you're a human being too, and it weighs on you. But in the end, mathematics, logic, and economics will prevail. And that's the best we can all do, Chris, is try to find something that's logical, that meets the test of economics, meets the test of mathematics, meets the test of old school logic. And you could check all three of those boxes. But sometimes logic and outcome in this crazy world have been inversely correlated until they're not. And that till they're not will happen. It's just a matter of when. Some people would say, with all the inflation we have right now and the craziness, why hasn't it happened yet? Well, I'll answer that. And that is because this is all about dollar hegemony. We are entering a period of time, the Great Reset, or whatever you want to call it, where the dollar is teetering, where the system that we've built upon a mountain of debt cannot handle a rise in interest rates. And it's either death by hyperinflation or death by depression. Take your pick, one or the other. And in the end, I do believe that you will be proven right. Gold and silver will be the last men standing, as everything else tries to find fair value in a world where price discovery is all but impossible, even in gold and silver right now.
Yeah, well, I think that makes sense. And perhaps it also depends on the approach someone is taking. I get it. We're in a trading environment. People are looking to buy low and sell high. And I think perhaps why I at least try to phrase things the way I do, where, hey, here's what I'm looking at, here's what I'm doing, why I did not choose to become a financial advisor, is that as I look at the situation, if it takes a couple of years, I'm okay with that. I mean, to me, I'm had my adventures since leaving Wall Street and the process of forming a business. There were times where I didn't have income. Now that, I can meet my expenses and then leave things sitting there for whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years. I mean, I do see a problem building. And what I felt extremely confident about back in 2011 or even 2009, when I started learning Austrian economics, is that the Fed was going to run into these problems that it has. Now, of course, since then, you had a big rally in the stock markets, which didn't occur in the silver market, although perhaps I'll pull up the NASDAQ chart here, because I think something that would be useful for people to take a look at is that my feeling was a lot of the rise in the NASDAQ was primarily just the result of money printing. I don't see a lot of productivity happening in that past decade. And to some degree, seeing just here's a 30% down move just in the last half year alone, as they've raised interest rates now 1.5, 1.75. And I think that's the thing. It leaves so few alternatives where you have the traditional school, Peter Lynch saying stocks for the long run, which makes sense. But now that they're pulling the money away, it leaves some tough choices. And I think that's why it's good for each person to really have the full information and decide what's right for them. I mean, if you need something in 2 years is different versus if you have the advantage of time. But in the whole scheme of the way these financial markets operate right now, it certainly does not leave an easy set of choices.
No, it doesn't. But look at what you're fighting. Look at the red bar up there. I mean, that's just bullshit. Snuff out inflation with the 75 basis point increase. Snuffing out inflation would be raising the federal funds rate by 800 basis points. Now you're snuffing out inflation. We're still a long ways away from snuffing out inflation. And I think that that's, I'd rather have someone shoot straight with me based upon years of experience in starting with being a Wharton grad all the way up to Wall Street, figuring it all out and talking to me about something logical with mathematics and economics that makes complete and total sense. Yet you look at the world around us of finance and none of it makes sense. And it's all based upon, like you said, easy money and low interest rates, where the markets were jacked up to irrational levels. And that's what made people feel wealthy. That's what allowed them to offshore all of our manufacturing capabilities so that people felt wealthy with their 401k in their home, and it didn't matter that we didn't produce anything anymore. But these types of decisions have consequences. And I think at the same time, we've angered the world with our mismanagement of the currency. And not only that, with our weaponizing of the dollar, telling the Russians who can and who can't use the dollar, knocking them out of SWIFT, freezing their assets. Don't you think that the rest of the world is thinking, are we next? China thinking this, are we next? Look at the relationship right now that was just struck between Iran and India. The rest of the world, 85 to 90% of the world does not care what the US says we can and cannot do. So look at the SIP system, the cross interbank payment system, which mirrors the SWIFT. This is a program that China has developed in conjunction with Russia. The steps are being put into place, or the pieces are being put into place to challenge the dollar. And when all of that money gets dumped, if you think inflation is bad now, the Fed is fighting with the 75 basis point increase. Wait until see what happens when 90% of the world who has to own dollars to buy oil starts to shed dollars in favor of other currencies, because now OPEC is allowing other currencies to buy oil. And I think that's where we are heading. And when that happens, not only do you see massive inflation, but you see interest rates go to the moon. There's your Klaus Schwab Great Reset. When the world dumps dollars, when the dollar is no longer the petrodollar, and they all come home, massive, massive, massive hyperinflation, massive rising interest rates, stocks, bonds, real estate, and the dollar all collapse at the same time. Why do you think gold was reclassified tier 1? Why do you think the central banks keep purchasing it? So I am simply saying you will be proven right, and it will be at the expense of the dollar. It will not be something that you will be happy to see, because it'll be at the expense of everyone around you. But I do think you will be proven right. And I, for one, admire the fact that it weighs on you. That means that you're sincere. And sincerity and honesty is the most important thing that we can have in in investing or financial advice. You're sincere, you're honest, you put your money where your mouth is. I know what you buy, I know what you own, I know what I own. And you and I are both very, very sincere about it. And that's the best you can do, Chris, because you're smart as hell, you have the pedigree to prove it, and the courage to stand up to the big boys that most of us don't have. So the fact that you're just showing that you're actually human, I think is admirable above all else.
Well, to what you said earlier, I was thinking about when you mentioned that most of what you have is silver and gold, and I'm trying to think, do I own it? I have a guitar, that's not silver or gold, but pretty much everything I have is in that. And again, I know everyone's situation is different, so that's why I try to be straightforward and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I do. I can't think of what else to do in this situation. And I get it, it's developing in slow motion, and for people who are bought silver when it was $25 or $28 and see it lower, that keeps me up more at night than you would imagine. Not I was always able to, from the trading floor, handle my own gain or loss. But in either case, it's like, but at the same time, you see now Japan's doing yield curve control and things are getting, you're reading articles about it's like George Soros like bets that hedge funds are piling up against the yen. The Europeans, they're talking about they have new terms out this week for money printing schemes. And so I know this perhaps maybe raises more questions that it answers, but just as we were talking before we started recording today, they're not easy situations. And I think we've seen out of governments between the pandemic and all the other things that these people aren't trying to help. And then we hear about Klaus Schwab saying, well, you're going to own nothing and like it. It's almost more of I thought I was getting into finance, and now I feel almost more like a crime investigator at times, which is, and it's tough because wanting to see silver go up, yet not sitting there rooting for, oh, well, this currency is collapsing, because there are those real world implications. And again,
I called you that once before. I called you, you are an investigative journalist. You've done more investigating and uncovering of things than anyone else in this industry that I've read for 30 years. And that's the truth. Just your interview with Bart Chilton alone, I tell almost everyone I talk to and almost every podcast I'm on that they need to search that out and listen to it. It validates everything we've been saying. And it's because of that type of information, because you brought that to the public, it allows me to sleep a lot better at night. Now, because I know in the end we'll be right. But I think one of the things people need to understand is that you're not buying what's behind you in that picture there, silver. You're not buying it to get rich. You're buying it because it's wealth. That's outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, and the Great Depression, and is still wealth, immutable wealth, and it will be when the dust settles. All signs are pointing to gold and silver expressing themselves at some point. And you don't have to look any further than just how starkly they defend the silver price, trying to keep it from fully expressing itself. Maybe it's because it's a challenger to the dollar hegemony. I don't know, to the system, to the whole Western fiat system, which is crumbling. And if it weren't for the fact that you can see the East is beginning to move away and set up infrastructure and set up currency systems and set up trading systems to move away from the dollar, it's because of that I have even more conviction that we'll be right. But if you're buying it to get rich, and I think there was a certain amount of the people, Chris, that since 2020, silver squeeze, they started buying it to get rich. It's the wrong way. I think you and I own it because we feel it's the safest place to be. And it offers amazing potential, yes. But I don't think you own silver to get rich. I've never asked you that. I know I don't own it to get rich. I own it because I feel it is wealth, undervalued wealth, a great value as far as wealth accumulation is concerned. But if you're buying it to get rich, if you're buying it because of the undervaluation and the gold silver ratio and all these things, well, it should explode. Well, you're going to have your feelings hurt when it doesn't move the way we think. But if you own it as wealth, knowing that it's there if you need it, not just for an emergency, could be an opportunity. Maybe there's a piece of real estate you want, or maybe markets change and there's great value in equities, or whatever it is. It's not just for an emergency. It's an opportunity as well. And if not, you have it and you give it to your family someday. So that's the way I think you need to look at gold and silver, and not as a vehicle to get wealthy, because when it fully does express itself, be careful what you wish for. It will not be good here in the US with silver at $300 an ounce. What that tells you is the dollar shit the bed. And with gold at 5,000 an ounce, it'll tell you the dollar shit the bed. You'll be right, better late than never, but it won't be something that you'll take glee in being right, in my opinion.
I hear you, and maybe that's why sometimes it's tough, because you just see a lot of things happening in the world that are far less than ideal, although I think at least...
Which should make silver go higher. That's what makes you go crazy. But that's the reason they hold it down even more, because it should be going higher, which means the dollar should be crumbling, which means if they really looked at, it's like the Wizard of Oz, they pull back the curtain like, holy shit, it's just a little old man. Same thing with the dollar. And I think that's the whole issue here, Chris, and you will be right. That's the bottom line, is you will be right.
Well, I like to think so. Unfortunate the way in which that may occur, yet such is the world we live in, and we just make the best with what we can do. And either case, I appreciate you discussing this. I know people give you the same thing from time to time while he's selling his book, and you sell gold and silver. Although, at least I feel it's helpful to present all the different sides, how we've come to this conclusion, and then at least just let people to have that information and make the decisions which are best for themselves. So
Of course, I'm selling my book. I own a precious metals company. I'm also fully invested in it myself. I've bought it every 2 weeks for 33 years. I don't own anything else besides a handful of mining shares and gold and silver. That's it. So, yeah, I'm selling my book, and I've also dedicated my life to it. And I put myself out on a limb, just like you do. You put yourself out on a bigger limb than I do. I give you tons of credit for it. You're courageous as hell. But the bottom line is that, yeah, I am talking my book. I do want to continue to stay in business, but doesn't mean I don't believe in it to my core, to my soul, just like you do. You may be talking silver too, but I know for a fact what you own, and we've talked about it, and I've seen it. And so you can have both. It doesn't have to be, someone who talks their book but doesn't own an ounce of silver. Now that's something that I would think twice about buying from. But someone who talks their book and has been accumulating and immersed in it more over half my life. I don't know. I am hugely emotionally invested in it as well, Chris. And the same things that you're talking about have weighed on me too. And that's why I trust you, and that's why I listen to you and follow you, because you're not full of shit. I might just say flat out, you're not. And I think that's the most important takeaway from this discussion. And when we talked about having this discussion different from what we normally do, I encourage it. I think it's great to let people see who you are and to know that you're honest and sincere. That to me makes it much easier to listen to everything that you're saying, knowing that it's coming from an honest, sincere guy who wants nothing but the best from his followers. And it's hurting that sometimes the advice that is given isn't correlated with the outcome we would expect yet. And we could explain the yet on another conversation. But for now, let's just say that you will be right. And, I'd rather be 6 months or a year and a half or 2 years early than 60 seconds late. Because one thing I will add to this, and I'll let you go, is that I think when this breaks, it's going to break so fast that if you haven't gotten at least a core position, you're screwed. And that's what I do believe. I think this will happen on a Sunday night. This will wake up to a new reality. This isn't going to be a slow burn where you have time slowly to switch out of your assets into something like gold and silver. I think it'll be like that. And that's the one thing that I don't think people are thinking about. I mean, look at that Terra as an example, or Luna stock. Look how fast it went. Bang. You woke up to a new reality. That's what's going to happen here. And that's why if you don't get in before it's obvious, and that's the problem, is that you're seeing things clearly ahead. You're way out there, and that's a curse, but it's also a blessing. If you can see what other people can't see way down there, and people wait for it, bang, it's over, you're done. You have to get in the life raft before the boat springs a leak. And that's your curse and mine, but in the end, it'll be a blessing. And so hard to deal with, Chris. I respect you immensely for having the courage to bring it up. I feel the same way, but I can tell you that from all the feedback I get from you, people appreciate the hell out of you and what you're doing. And so don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing your fellow brothers and sisters, humanity, a good favor.
well, that's kind of you to say that. And to your previous point, I mean, the background as an option trader, we were trained to see, all right, if this happens, then that happens. And perhaps maybe I thought things would develop sooner, although you could see where this was headed, and that whatever silver is doing, that the Fed was going to be in a problematic situation, which sure enough they are, despite whether I heard Jerome Powell at his press conference this week. He said he doesn't see any signs of an economic recession. Janet Yellen can't see it either. It seems like almost everyone else on the planet does.
These are the people who told us inflation was no big deal, it's just transitory, and they're full of shit.
Well, there's that too. So in either case, in wrapping up, if people do have questions, if they are interested in buying or selling silver or doing anything with any of the other precious metals, what could you let folks know about that?
Yeah, so our new website is probably 30 days away or less from launching. We're finally getting to the finishing touches, and we will have a special page dedicated directly for Arcadia listeners. In the meantime, they just send an email to Arcadia Miles Franklin. We do have on special right now for your listeners 2022 Britannias at $575 over spot. It will be as good of a price as you'll find in 99.9% of the companies out there or better. Immediate delivery. They are in stock. And it's not just a purchase. Send us a question if you have any questions about what Chris and I talked about. Arcadia Miles Franklin will answer them. We'll send you an updated price list until our new site is done. We do have an old site. It's up, milesfranklin.com. The store is closed. The prices are not operable. There's information and other things on that site, but the new one will have all of this included. In the meantime, Arcadia@milesfranklin.com. Questions, need an inventory with current prices, whatever. And either myself, I know Yara, or someone at Miles Franklin will reach out to the people and answer their questions, get them what they need, and make it a good experience.
Well, I appreciate that. And certainly getting information, again, it's not licensed or for me to know everyone's situation or what you should or shouldn't do. And I just hope people do invest responsibly, and I just try and bring the best information that I have. I mean, these are the things that are happening in the world and how I've responded to it, and certainly happy to be here and answer questions. We actually are doing our first office hours next Thursday, June 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern. So if people have questions there, Andy, maybe you'll join us for a little bit.
I'm on. Help me in. I'll be there. Write this down right now. Thursday, June 23rd. 6 p.m. Eastern.
Yep. And the link for anyone who would like to join in the description field below is absolutely free to attend, and is for no other reason than just trying to help people hear what the banks and governments are often not mentioning, and then you can make your own best decisions, because I would rather go figure out something else to do than do anything that's not helping the people listen. I hope that comes across. And again, it's a confusing world out there these days, but just trying to share what I'm seeing. And I appreciate that you're doing that as well, Andy. And thank you for this call. And we'll look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Stay well, brother. And don't ever change one bit, Chris. Stay true to who you are. That's why you are who you are. That's why you've risen to such a level of prominence in such a short period of time. So thanks for letting me be here. I look forward to seeing you on that call on Thursday, and hope everyone out there stays well.
All right. Appreciate that. And we'll check in with you next week.